Good morning. I'm Jennifer Brell, an editor at William Morrow, and I've had the great fortune of working with this man for more than a decade. I feel rather superfluous. I've been asked to introduce Neil to you, yet I realize that he hardly needs introduction, particularly to this gathering. But to earn my keep, here are the basics. Neil is the #1 New York Times best-selling, multiple award-winning author of novels, short stories, graphic novels, essays, poems, plays, screenplays, and song lyrics for audiences of all ages. The commencement address he gave to Philadelphia's University of the Arts has just been published as Make Good Art, in a volume that is in itself a work of art, designed by Chip Kidd. His eagerly anticipated and already rave-reviewed new novel, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, goes on sale June 18th. A charming and witty and sometimes scary new picture book for kids, Fortunately the Milk, illustrated by Scotty Young, is coming this fall. And he's married to a rock star. Today, Neil is going to tell us a little bit about his upcoming books and about why fiction is dangerous. Afterward, there will be a brief question and answer session. Ladies and gentlemen, my own personal rock star, Neil Gaiman.
Stealing the mic and taking it to the chair. There's another mic down there, isn't there? No, the mics are fun. I can hold it. Gives me something to do with my hands. Hello. You people down there, you're just going to be staring at a podium the whole time. Hang on. Is that better? You're welcome. So, hello. There's nothing I can do about anybody who's stuck behind a pillar. You're doomed. So, this morning, I got here and I signed 1,000 books. And which is because each of you gets 2 books, and then I signed a bunch of downloadable e-book postcards for the overflow that have snuck in technically when they started putting extra chairs in here. So anyway, so what you're going to be getting will be copies of Make Good Art, which is the beautiful Chip Kidd speech. And you're also going to be getting a book that will not be published until September, which is called Fortunately the Milk. You guys make the best noises. And I was actually just handed a bag of promotional badges for Fortunately the Milk, which are probably the silliest things ever to come out of the mighty publishing empire of HarperCollins. And we were trying to figure out how you can promote a book like Fortunately the Milk, about which you guys know very little, but we'll know a lot very soon. So they all say on them, the most exciting adventure ever written about milk since. And this one says, The Catcher in the Milk. Yeah, have a Catcher in the Milk badge. Brave New Milk. Sorry. Les Milk. I'm going to take somebody's eye out. This is not. Charlie and the Chocolate Milk. Westward Milk. The milk also rises. Farewell to milk. Whoa. A tale of two milks. Missed. Sorry. Got it. I mean, somebody got it. The remains of the milk. So, I'm going to stop flinging milk badges now. There are more, and we may actually wind up giving them to people whose questions get selected, because lots of you have written questions, and so it's kind of weird because this year I have 2 accidental books coming out. Probably there isn't really a writing sort of author lessons 101, but if there was, there will be a list of do's and don'ts on it, and it will be a really good list of do's and don'ts, because I know that in the don't column, don't have a major novel for adults coming out in June, followed by a book for kids in September, would be high on the list of don'ts, and it all happened a bit accidentally. Fortunately, the milk began because I felt guilty about dads. Approximately 25 years ago, I was telling my son, Michael, who at that point would have been about 4, to do something, the kind of thing you tell kids to do, like go to bed. He looked up at me furiously and he said, "I wish I didn't have a dad." He said, "I wish I had." And then you could see him trying to figure out, well, what else could you have? And he said, "I wish I had goldfish." And he went off to bed. And I'm just going, that's brilliant. And so I went and wrote the first sentence of The Day I Swapped My Dad for 2 goldfish. And it just sat there for about 4 years, until one day I was completely stuck on something else. And I was just looking at files that didn't really contain very much, looking for some kind of idea, and there's the first paragraph of The Day I Swapped My Dad for 2 goldfish. And I went, I know what happens next. So I wrote it. And that technically was my first children's book. And I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's about a kid whose dad is sitting reading the paper, which is kind of dull. And he trades his dad for 2 goldfish owned by the kid next door. And then his mum comes back and she's like, "Where's your father?" And he's like, "Well, look at my goldfish. Aren't they great?" And she's like, "Okay, you take the goldfish and don't come back without your dad." And he goes to the kid who owned the goldfish, and the kid's like, "Yeah, well, he was kind of dull. He didn't do anything. He just read the paper, so I traded him for this electric guitar." And so it's a story about this kid going all over town, getting his dad back, and finally he finds him sitting in a rabbit run, sadly eating a carrot and reading his newspaper. And the book came out, and it's been very popular and very well loved, and it gets given to dads. And I felt really guilty about this. And slowly, as time goes on, you're sort of going, I need to do something that dads could be proud of. So I decided to write a book that was a dad kind of story. And it's one of these dads who and it just started out with him going out to get the milk for his children's cereal. And he's a little bit late coming back. And when his children ask him what happened, he tells them. everything that happened, trying to get the milk back, beginning, obviously, with him being kidnapped by aliens who want to remodel the planet and, replace the mountains with throw cushions and things like that. Australia will be replaced by a huge decorative plate with Australia on it. Terrible taste. And then, he escapes from them and is captured by pirates. And then he's rescued by a time-traveling stegosaurus in a hot air balloon. And after that, things start getting weird. And it was a thing in my notebook that I was writing just every time I felt like cheering myself up. I would go and I would write a little bit of Fortunately the Milk, and it probably took about a year to write. And I'd just write a scene and make myself laugh and then put it away and come back to it. And then eventually I looked at it and I went, well, it's a book. It wasn't meant to be a book. It was just meant to be a sort of little picture book, but it just kept going. And so I handed that over to a slightly bemused editor. Very pleased. But on Twitter, there's a wonderful artist named Scotty Young, who a few of you may be familiar with. He's a fantastic artist. And at some point on Twitter, somebody had said to him, I wish you'd do something with Neil. And he'd written back and said, I would love to work with Neil. And I dropped him a direct line. I said, would you? And he said, oh yeah. So Scotty got to illustrate Fortunately the Milk, which is really fun. Do you want somebody to draw a time-traveling stegosaurus in a hot air balloon? Scotty Young is your man. It may happen to some of you. So that was one of my accidental books. The other is much darker. And it's called The Ocean at the End of the Lane. The Ocean at the End of the Lane began in a lot of different ways for me. I could tell the very sort of simple story of why there is an unexpected Neil Gaiman novel coming out right now, which is that I started writing a short story. And after a while, I looked around and I decided I was writing a novelette. I checked the word count on Wikipedia of what makes a short story and what makes a novelette, and I went, well, it's a novelette, that's good. And then I kept writing it. And then I decided, obviously, I knew that I must have gone past novelette somewhere in there, so now it was a novella. And then, a novella is long. You can go from 18,000 words to 40-something thousand words. You're still a novella. So, sent off an email at some point in there to my wonderful editor, Jennifer, who came up and introduced me and said, novella. Not really sure what we're going to do with it, but it seems to be happening. And then I got to the end. And I did a word, and I'd been writing it all in longhand, which is how I like to write. So I got to the end, and then I typed it all up, and then I did a word count. And then I sent Jen a rather awkward little note saying, I appear to have written a novel. I hope you don't mind. And she didn't. So that's the objective story about how the book was written, which says absolutely nothing about what went on inside my head or what kind of book it is. And it's a very peculiar, very, very dark little book. And I think it's funny that I've got two books coming out within a few months of each other. One's a children's book with an adult narrator that is probably the funniest, silliest thing I've ever done. And then one's an adult book with a 7-year-old viewpoint character. It's being told by an adult who, at the end of the prologue, starts to remember things about being 7 that he'd forgotten for a long time. And now they're coming back. And it began for me in about 2003. And I'd bought a Mini. And I was very proud of my Mini. And my dad, who I didn't see very much because he was in England, came over to America. And I said, look, Mini. And he said, yeah, nice cars. Not much like the one that we used to drive, that I had in the early 60s. And I said, oh my gosh, your white Mini. I'd forgotten about that. Why did you get rid of it? It was such a great little car. And he said, you mean I never told you? And I said, no. And he said, well, we had a lodger and came over from South Africa with a bunch of money that he'd been given by other South Africans, because you couldn't take money out of South Africa in those days. A lot of his friends had given him money and he'd smuggled it out, and he was meant to be banking it in England for them. And instead, he went to Brighton, to the casino. And he spent all his own money, and then he only planned to dip into their money until he'd won what he'd lost back. And then he lost everything, and he came back from Brighton, and in the small hours of the morning, he stole the Mini and took it down to the end of the lane and committed suicide in it. And I thought, that happened. My car and my lane. And I was 7, and I was reading books, and I never knew things like that happened. Nobody told me. And that was sort of the beginning point. I just thought that I didn't know anything more about this guy, and didn't really, but that event, or that idea of that event, because it's not really about the real person, sat in my head like that weird little grains of sand that eventually produced pearls, and it irritated me. And at the same time, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, somebody told me that one of the farms down the lane, at the end of the lane that I lived on, had been in the Doomsday Book, which is the book that William the Conqueror ordered compiled of everything in England, all of the properties in England when he conquered. And I thought, that means it's 1,000 years old. And it didn't occur to me that the farm would not have looked like that 1,000 years ago. In my head, this big old red brick farm had obviously just been there for 1,000 years. And I thought, I wonder if the people who are there have been there for 1,000 years. So, and that became a kind of weird little thing in my head, and I would play with it. And I'd play with it when I was in my teens. Some of my early teens, they became called the hemp stocks. I'm not quite sure why. And I always meant to write about them. And never quite did. So I'd put some hemp stocks into Stardust, just to show that I was going to. And then when I was writing the Graveyard book, Liza Hempstock is in there, and she's obviously related to the Hempstock family and to Daisy Hempstock. And people occasionally would say, you've got the Hempstocks in Stardust and Liza Hempstock in the Graveyard book. Are they related? And I'd say, well, yeah, kind of. But one day, but the problem with writing a story about the Hempstocks is they lived at the end of my lane. And suddenly one day, I thought, well, if I'm going to do a short story, I should just do a little short story about that. And I started this short story. And really, it was written because I missed my wife. She was in Melbourne making an album, and she was going to be there for 4 months. And I thought, well, I'll write a little story that's not actually about my family, not really about the stuff that happened, but that's very much about what it was to see the world through my eyes when I was 7. And also about the landscape that I grew up in, because that landscape simply isn't there anymore. Now it's turned into giant housing estates, all of these strange empty places where we used to go. So it really was, that was where it began. And the process of writing it was one that got very, very dark, very peculiar. I've heard people point to writing and say it can be like driving at night. And writing this for me wasn't just like driving at night. This was like driving at night with one headlight out in thick fog. You can just see far enough ahead to not drive off the road. So you kind of keep going. When I would finish writing for the day, I would have a pretty good idea of what I would be writing tomorrow. I would have no idea of what was happening in the story of the day after that. Which means the things that happen are very, very organic. And it became a story, I guess, about stories, which will come as no surprise at all to anybody who's ever read anything by me ever. But it's probably a lot less intellectual than a lot of my stuff. It's very much about what it is to take refuge in books, the relationship between people and fiction. I'm fascinated by, there's very weird when you've written a book and it hasn't quite come out, but people have read it because there are review copies floating around, and then early reviews start coming out, and you're reading it and going, well, it's interesting. Is it that? There seems to be a school of thought coming out of the UK that it is not actually a fantasy novel at all, that it is absolutely mainstream and deals with the dangers of memory. And I'm going, perfectly interesting, valid point of view. Not one I had when I wrote it, but all power to you. So those are the 2 main books that I've got coming out, and that's sort of what they are. And that has nothing at all to do with why fiction is dangerous, which is the kind of topic that you come up with when somebody says, well, you're going to be doing a discussion at Book Expo on the Saturday morning. What would you like the topic of your discussion to be? And you say, well, why fiction is dangerous. And figuring it's 6 weeks away, I'll come up with something by then. And it's actually really only about a week ago that I said to them, so this discussion. They said, yes. I said, who am I going to be in discussion with? They said, you'll just be talking. I said, that's not a discussion. That is a monologue. Discussion is the one where somebody else comes up and they do all the work by saying, so Neil, tell us about your new book. And you go, good question. I know why non-fiction is dangerous. Non-fiction is dangerous because when you're about 8 years old, you find a lot of books entering your life with titles like 1001 Exciting Things a Boy Can Do. And then you do them. And you reap the consequences. For example, did you know that using only the common beetroot, the beet, you can dye your father's white shirts a deep purpley red? He will not like this, but you can. And you're going, but it said in the book, take a white shirt. I don't have any white shirts. Did not appreciate this. And then there was toffee making. And toffee making was great. You got a recipe for making toffee. And I did it. And you heated up the sugar, the water and the butter and the syrup, and you got it very, very hot, and then you got a glass, and you dripped everything in, and eventually it got hard, and you went, yes, this thing is now hard. I have now a lump of toffee the size of a softball, which I will put in my pocket and take to school. Somewhere in the late afternoon, you will reach into your pocket for a handkerchief, which is in your pocket, and you will pull out the handkerchief, and a softball-sized, golden, amber-like lump of toffee is going to do a beautiful arc into the air. And you will discover the physical properties of toffee are really interesting, because if you've made it right, when it hits the ground, it will shatter like glass and completely cover the floor of the classroom in tiny glass-like toffee shards. And you will find yourself absolutely unable to convince your maths teacher that this is not something you would do on purpose. Despite the fact that you're going, why would I want to do this? This is my toffee. Of course but you will spend the rest of the lesson cleaning up, picking up tiny glass-like shards of toffee. And then you'll be given a note. You will take it to your headmaster, who will take his pipe out of his mouth and say, well, I know that it's sort of a cliche to say this will hurt me more than it will hurt you, but actually it's going to hurt you a lot more than it's going to hurt me, Gaiman. And we'll take out a large sneaker and hit you with it. So that is why non-fiction is dangerous. Fiction is dangerous, of course, because it lets you into other people's heads. Fiction is dangerous because it gives you empathy. Fiction is dangerous because it shows you that the world doesn't have to be like the one that you live in, which is an incredibly dangerous thing for the world. I was in China in 2007 for a science fiction convention, and it was the first officially recognized science fiction convention in China, and the Communist Party had agreed, and they brought in a bunch of us, Michael Swanwick, me, a whole bunch of American and me authors. And we went to this Chengdu, and there were lots and lots of panels where we're talking to young writers, and at one point I took one of the party officials aside, and I said, look, while not actually illegal, science fiction has been very much frowned upon and regarded as dangerous and subversive for a very long time in China. Regarded chiefly as subversive because they were never quite sure if they were being criticized. Because you can say things in science fiction. Nobody's quite sure. Are you criticizing the government or not? You're talking about some kind of evil anthill-like government. Is that the government party or not? So I said, why have you said yes to this? Why have you actually got behind this? And he said, well, in China, we're really good at making things that people bring to us. They bring us iPods, iPhones, we make them. They bring us things, we go, that's great. But we don't come up with them. We don't invent. We don't innovate. And we went to America recently, and we went and we talked to the people at Google, to the people at Apple, to the people at Microsoft. And one of the things we asked all of these people who invent, who innovate, is, what did you read as children? And they all said, we read science fiction. We read fantasy. We thought, we read this stuff and we went, the world doesn't have to be like the one we're in right now. We can change it. And that was the point they decided to encourage the reading of science fiction. And I thought that actually is the big dangerous thing. Letting people into other people's heads is dangerous, and showing them that things can be different is incredibly dangerous. Now, we have a huge stack of questions in from you lot, and I said that I would do my very best to get through as many as I could. Here, let's swap.
Is it on?
There we go.
Okay. We have a lot of questions. We're going to do as many as we can. Okay, Neil. What is the worst sentence you ever wrote?
It's the worst sentence I ever wrote. You know, this sort of doesn't count, but 1985, my first real book was a book that I wrote with Kim Newman, and it was called Ghastly Beyond Belief. And Ghastly Beyond Belief was my compilation with Kim of the worst quotes from fantasy and science fiction and horror that we could find. He did movies, and I did books. So I actually started out my career by typing out sentences like from Night of the Crabs. I think my two favorite sentences from Night of the Crabs were, "What a beautiful night this would be," he thought, as he walked past the barbed wire that surrounded the war memorial, "if it weren't for the threat of giant crabs." And of course, but even that paled. My very favorite sentence was, "He wasn't going to leave Janice Williams alone that night, crabs or no crabs." So while I didn't originate that, I did type it.
Okay. Have you experienced rejection or failure as a writer? And if so, how do you handle it?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that happens, especially when you're starting out, is you write stories and you send them out. In my head, as a young man, whenever I would send out a story, what I would expect to have happen was the following morning, a limo would show up at my house, and people would get out of it, and they would say, "This is yours. We loved your story so much. You never have to work again. Just thank you. Thank you for writing this story, which we are going to publish and make sure everybody in the whole world reads." And instead, 6 weeks later, it would come back with a little slip saying, "Not quite right for us," or whatever. It was okay. What you do is, what I did two different things. What I did as a very young man was get things back and go, either I'm not very good, which I do not choose to believe, although probably was kind of true, or I'm just doing this wrong, and I need to find out how this all works. So that was the point where I became a journalist, and I became a journalist specializing in publishing, in books, and I found out how it all worked, and 2 months later had sold 2 books, and then got a quote from Muddy Waters, which I stuck to my typewriter, which tells you how long ago this was. And it just said, "Don't let your mouth write note check your tail can't cash." And that was my quote. And I went, how did I just sold 2 books. I've never written a book. What am I doing? And got through it. My tail cashed those checks. But really, I kind of dealt with it by just vowing to myself that, I would try and write things that were so brilliant that nobody could reject them. And now, of course, I'm in this horrible other situation, which is I worry that nobody's going to tell me if I write a dud short story. Because everyone's going to go, whoa, we got a Neil Gaiman short story. We'll put it on the cover of the book. It'll be great.
I'll tell you.
That is why I love you. Good.
That's
You
our
would,
pact.
too.
I would. Yeah. All right, next question.
Go
Who
for
was
it.
your favorite teacher?
Who was my favorite teacher? Probably Mr. Hayes.
The maths teacher?
Bill Hayes. No, he was an English teacher, of course. And he was better than any other teacher I ever had because he gave me money. I would have been about 10 going on 11, somewhere like that. And he said, "Do you ever read Gone with the Wind?" And I said, "No." He said, "I'll give you 10 shillings if you read Gone with the Wind." And I said, "All right." And I read Gone with the Wind over the next week, staying up late. And have no idea to this day. And when I finished it, I went to him and said, "Finished it." And we chatted about it for a while. He gave me 10 shillings, which was a lot of money. No idea why. But it absolutely moved him from the ranks of pretty good teachers to absolutely my favorite teacher ever. That, the idea, and I thought, if only this catches on amongst teachers. Just pay me to read books. I'm there. I'm so there.
Outside of writing, what accomplishment are you most proud of?
I don't know if it's technically an accomplishment, but I'm proudest of my kids. I have 3 amazing kids, and I just love them. So, and they baffle me. And they baffle me in really cool ways. Isn't it embarrassing when that happens? If it's any consolation, it normally happens to me up here in front of people, and then it destroys the mic as well. So I'm trying to pretend it's not me, and the thing's going bzz, bzz. No, I love it. I mean, Mike, my oldest, is a software engineer at Google, and we have these great conversations because I'll say to him, "So, tell me, what are you doing?" I'll say, "Well, Dad, it's very easy. What. And it's exactly like, the adults in the Charlie Brown cartoons. And he'll get to the end, and I'll say, "Well, I didn't quite get that. Can you run me through some more of it?" And he said, "Well, you understand that Google is our primary mission is search engines." And I'll say, "Yes." He said, "Well, you understand that Python is a programming language?" And I'll go, "Yes." And I'll go, "Well, what. It's amazing.
Okay.
And Holly is a milliner, and she does hats. So I have a daughter who is a milliner. Yes.
Great hats.
And then there's Maddie, and she's at Wake Forest, and she's awesome. I have no idea what she's going to be doing. She's interning on Teen Vogue this summer, which I suspect is going to be the very soon I will be having the female equivalent of the, "What are you doing?" "Well, Dad, what. Okay, you understand that Armani is a fashion house." "Yes, I've got that." "Well, what.
Okay. We all want to know, how is the American Gods TV show coming along?
We're waiting currently to hear back from HBO. It's a sort of like a very slow game of tennis. I write a script, a pilot script. I give it to them. They wait a long time for me. Then it goes to them. Then we wait a long time for them, and then they come back with notes, and I go away and redo it. It's actually it's been a really interesting thing because starting out, the first pilot script that I wrote for them, I think I got much too into the idea of going, I can do all the stuff I didn't do in the book. So I started it like, you were half an hour into the thing before you even got to prison. I got to do the whole, you got to watch Shadow and the bank robbery that goes wrong and how it goes wrong and all of that. So everything, and actually it was much more, the process of doing the thing has been much more HBO going, can you make it more like the book? And me go, well, yeah, but I already wrote that. Look at all this cool new stuff I've written. And they go, yeah, you can do that in flashback later on. But we actually think starting it where the book starts, that's good. So we've got to that point. And right now, I finished a script, and we're now waiting for their notes, which I believe come in this week. So I'll find out.
Good. After 30 years of success, do you still feel doubt?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how can you not? You, and it hasn't been 30 years of success. There's been things that worked and things that didn't. There are, short stories that did not work as well as you hoped they would. There are things that you write that, just don't quite work. And I'm, you know what I'm like. I am an author, and as such, I'm a weird mixture of appalling arrogance and absolute self-doubt and humility, and as like a sort of nightmarish layer cake, because I will do things to Jen of going, I don't think it's very good. What do you think? And she'll say, well, maybe you could change that. And I'm saying, change that. Are you mad? Why? This is why that is like that. And she'll go,
never mind. Okay, Neil, you're a huge supporter of libraries, and we appreciate that. Yay! My mom was a librarian, children's librarian. Did you ever fantasize about being a librarian? A hot one, of course.
No, because in my head, hot librarians are, apart from anything else, of a very different gender from me. And no, I mean, the two professions that I don't know that I fantasized about, but that I could actually imagine wanting when I was a kid growing up, were English teacher and librarian. They were the things that, they were the people I loved, they were the people I respected, and they were the things that I was good at. I didn't know that I'd be good at being an English teacher or a librarian, but when I was 7, all of my books in alphabetical order, the amount of worry that I gave to Roger Lancelin Green over whether that man belonged in the L's or the G's. Like, what? What are you, Roger Lancelin Green? Why are you writing these books of tales of the Norsemen? Why can't you just be Roger Green or Roger Lancelin? I would know where to put you. And I put him in the L's and later discovered that was wrong. No, I could absolutely have been a librarian. I loved books. Librarians tell me never to tell people this, because they, you go to libraries now and they have all these signs about no unaccompanied children, and they say, do not tell people this. They will use this as daycare. But I talked my parents into dropping me off on their way to work in my summer holidays at the local library, and that was where they would drop me off. Sometimes I would take sandwiches, which I would go out when I got hungry into the parking lot, eat my sandwiches, and then go back in. And mostly I just not even think about eating and just be there, reading my way through the children's library, which you could do in alphabetical order, which was great. And then I finished the children's library, and I was about 12, and I'd done it all. And so I started on the adult library and discovered that you could not do that in alphabetical order. It got really dull.
very early in the A's, I'm going, why do I have to read this? So then I started getting much more selective.
Do you prefer writing books geared toward a specific age? If so, which age group do you prefer? Adult, children's, young adult?
I like writing mostly. I don't think about age group. Mostly I just think, what would I like to read? Part of that, I think, is from having been a dad. If you were a father for kids for a long time, and my kids had, about a 12-year age gap between them, which was kind of fun. It means that you're going to spend about 20 years reading books aloud. And you rapidly realize there is no such thing as a book just for kids, because every book for kids is going to have to be read aloud by somebody of your age. And the trouble with books for little kids is they have to be read over and over and over and over. So you start feeling very, very sorry for, you want to do the best thing you can for little kids, knowing that it may be 5 times a night for months. I could still recite the entirety of a book called Catch the Red Bus, in which a family of bears go to the seaside on a number of differently colored transportation devices. So no, I really don't. I like writing stories. I tend to worry more about what I've written. Sometimes things turn up in your head and you go, well, that is obviously a story for kids or whatever. And at that point, I'm trying to write it mostly for me when I was that age. And I try and write the thing that I would have liked. And bearing in mind that adults are going to have to read them too.
What prompted your All Hallows read? Such a wonderful idea. I loved participating. Would love to hear the origin story.
All Hallows read, which is a thing that I came up with a few years ago and which has kind of caught on, I'm really, really proud of, happened on a plane. And it was about the week after they'd started putting wireless Wi-Fi on planes. And I was on a plane from Los Angeles to Minneapolis. And I had time to kill. And I'm on the internet. And we were heading up towards Halloween. And and it wasn't even like there was anything that tipped it over. I just suddenly thought, well, wouldn't it be an interesting idea if people gave each other scary books at Halloween? I just love the idea of, I thought there aren't enough festivals that involve giving books. There aren't any. And Halloween would be a really good one. So I just said on the internet, let's have this. What would you call it? I asked on Twitter. And dozens of replies came in from people all over the world, and All Hallows Read just seemed like the best one. So I said, thank you, person who invented All Hallows Read. That's what it's now called. And got home, registered the website, and just encouraged it. And what was nice was librarians loved the idea, bookshops loved the idea, Stephen King loved the idea. I have no idea why Stephen King thought it would be a good thing to give people scary books, but he got behind it. Suddenly it got traction, and it's been growing, and each year there's more stuff happening. And we did HarperCollins did this fantastic poster competition, a beautiful poster that came out last year from Harper's for All Hallows Read. But what I love is it isn't a Harper-specific thing, it's just spreading. And that was the idea. I just think more people should read more books. It's like I wanted an excuse.
Here's a question about your writing process. When writing, how similar is your process through different projects? Is each book its own discovery, or do you work through them all in a similar way?
No. Each book is definitely its own discovery. Each book, when I finished American Gods, I remember talking to Gene Wolfe, who is one of my heroes, and I think one of the great living, probably one of the greatest living American writers. And I said, Gene, I think I figured out how to write a novel. And he looked at me with infinite pity. And he said, Neil, you never learn how to write a novel. You just learn how to write the novel you're on. Which, the next time I sat down to write a novel, I discovered, yeah, it's true. Same with Doctor Who episodes. You never learn how to write one. You just learn how to write the one you're on. And I like that. Actually, I think it's good. It's a learning process. If I knew how to do it, it's one reason why I tend. I always mean to write sequels. People say, "Why don't you write sequels?" Neil Gaiman does not write sequels. And I go, "Well, actually, it's not like I'm standing up going, I shall never write a sequel. There are sequels I'd love to write, but I'm much more likely to go, oh, shiny, when confronted by something I have no idea how to do. Find something over here that I really do know how to do, and I figured it out, and I learned how to do it the last time, and everybody loved it, and there are people waiting. And then over here is something I have no idea what it is, and nobody's waiting for it. I don't even think anybody's really going to like it. I will do that thing. Because that's cool, and it's new.
What have you learned from listening to Jack Benny? Has he influenced your writing, and in what way?
What have I learned from listening to Jack Benny? I've learned an awful lot about America from about 1932 through to 1955. The Jack Benny radio shows they're all out there right now on MP3, and they're really good. Actually, that's not true. They get good around 1942, at which point he's gone through 3 sets of writers at that point, and finally he gets in some sort of pretty cool writers who are, so they're as good as he is. What did I learn? I don't know. I wish I could say something like, well, timing, but it's not actually true. What have I learned from Jack Benny? I don't know. I have actually started a story that's sort of based around Jack Benny. I've taken a fictionalized version of Jack Benny and the people around him, and started writing it. And it's something I have notebooks with things that exist in a kind of a half-life. Fortunately, the milk was one of those for a while. There's a thing called Pirate Stew, which is which is probably the next children's picture book, which I've been working on for years. Every now and then I'll write a little bit more of it. And the Jack Benny Project is one of those.
Okay. Well, I know we have to go because the room needs to be used, but I do want to say that there are a number of questions in here which are not really a question, and what these cards say is, thank you, Neil.
Oh. You want... Thank you. And thank you. And all of you who were here at some ridiculous time in the morning, thank you so much.
Yep, everyone, if you want to stay seated, please. We're going to be handing out the books starting in the first row back, because we want to make sure that everyone that got here first is going to get the first copies. And we only have 500 copies of both the books, so we're going to be handing those out accordingly. If you don't want to wait for a book, you can feel free to head out. But if you want a book, please stay seated and then leave as soon as you get your book. Thank you.